Welcome to The Rebel. Marissa, your video the other day about the anti-Bill C-51 protest has gone totally viral, partly because it was so funny, but also because I think you saw things and reported things that other journalists sort of threw down the memory hole. Do you know what I mean?
I want to be clear. I mean, I think probably 95% of the people I interviewed at this protest were included in my report. It wasn't just some 30-second hatchet job, which is what a lot of sort of trolls on Twitter, as we call them, would like you to believe. No, these are actual people that I just approached. I didn't handpick them for any particular reason. I asked them, and it was your classic example of Harper derangement syndrome. I know my friend Anthony Fury at the Toronto Sun wrote about it yesterday, but it is really that. It was these people that protested this bill. They clearly had not read. They did not know why, except that this was another example of Harper being this evil terrorist.
Yeah, well, I mean, the actual clip was very long. You spoke to so many people. I mean, it wasn't like you went in. I find that when you go to protests, the toughest questions are the simplest ones, like, why are you here? Now, there they could say, oh, we're against C-51, but when you ask them basic questions like, why, or what's in it, they'd that one guy said, it's because I'll be banned from growing garlic in my backyard.
I mean, it's funny. It would be funny if it weren't so sad. There are legitimate reasons to be upset or to perhaps be concerned about Bill C-51. I've spoken about it before. I think when any legislation touches the issue of freedom of speech, we need to be concerned about it. At the same time,
privacy and freedom of association,
But at the same time, you know, the propaganda aspect of all this is not immaterial to what we're talking about. We know that ISIS is recruiting people online through propaganda tools, which is, you know, in part why the Conservatives have introduced this bill. So there are legitimate reasons to be concerned. I wasn't convinced at this protest.
Yeah. You know what? I would be skeptical if a single person at that rally had actually read the bill, except for maybe one. Adam Vaughan, the Liberal MP who voted for the bill in Parliament, came to the anti-C-51 rally. What do you make of that?
I think it's notable that he was there. Justin Trudeau came out very early and declared that he would support this piece of legislation. At UBC, he explained why he would support this piece of legislation, which is essentially, and I'll paraphrase here, because he doesn't want the Conservatives to label him as anti-military. You know, and that's problematic for me, because you go out and you give this liberty speech and you pretend that you're this principled man, when in reality it's all about politics for you. It's cynical politics.
Now, there was a sign there about terrorism, but the person they called a terrorist was Stephen Harper. That says three things to me. First of all, these were not serious people. Second of all, if they're claiming that our democratically elected, you know, constitutionally restrained prime minister is a terrorist, which if anyone were to take that seriously, would undermine support for democracy. But most importantly, they're profaning the word terrorism. Oh, well, if Stephen Harper's a terrorist, I guess terrorists aren't that bad, because if he's no better than a terrorist, they're no worse than him. I think that shows a lack of moral seriousness.
Absolutely, and if you consider all of the questions I asked about whether or not they thought jihadist terrorism in Canada was real, I'm not overblowing this, friends. We saw it on Parliament Hill. Yeah. He wasn't some deranged, mentally ill guy. We saw him in a video declaring his motive. Yep. You know, they clearly don't take this as serious as I think they should. Yeah.
I want to talk about two quick things before we wrap up. Children at a protest. I love going out with my kids. We typically go to fun things, petting zoos, a restaurant, whatever, going skating. I'm not opposed to bringing kids to a political event to show people about things, but I remember last year I went to an anti-Enbridge protest in Vancouver, and some parent gave her kid a sign that said F-U-C-K Enbridge. And I thought, what are you doing? What are you doing to your kid? Why are you using your kid as a weapon? Bring a child to a public event, even to a protest. I can see it, but I want to ask you, because you were there, I wasn't. Were these kids being used as weapons, or were these kids being exposed to gross stuff like at that anti-Enbridge protest?
Well, in fairness, I didn't see any children holding signs with swear words on them.
Okay.
There were a few kids there. I obviously didn't have an opportunity to speak to them in part because I can't really as a journalist.
Yeah.
But
and
if they're underage.
Well, listen, and I got to say, I'm not necessarily against a kid coming to a public event. I mean, but I'm glad you reported that none of them were being used in a weird way.
From what I saw, there were over 1,000 people in this protest. Yeah. Well,
I appreciate you. Now, last point, you know, I recognize some of the protesters. I'm sure you did. I mentioned some of the usual suspects, the MP who goes to every protest, Adam Vaughan. there was also a union presence. We saw the Communist Party there and some radical groups, but labor unions that charged their members union dues were really amongst the organizers here, which is weird because this Bill C-51 has got nothing to do with terrorism, nothing to do with labor unions, nothing to do with negotiations for more pay. What do you make about the fact that severely normal Canadians who have to work for a union had their dues taken to support such a wacky, insane event?
Well, that's always the problem. If you're a member of a union, you've got your union leadership going out and fighting on your behalf, perhaps against or for something that you don't necessarily support. We've seen it before at other various protests that we've seen. This was just another example of it.
Yeah, Marissa, great to talk with you. That was great work. That was one of our most successful videos in terms, it truly went viral because you did real journalism. And what I mean by that is you didn't just go there as a stenographer for the protesters. You asked them basic questions and you showed how hollow they were. Great work.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
You're watching TheRebel.media.